Hey everybody, welcome to No Script, No Problem on Bleav, the #1 podcast network for professionals. I'm your host, Steve Berkowitz. Today, we're going to move the reality check to later in the episode and get to the interview right away because I'm talking to two Academy Award nominated filmmakers. That's right, the Oscar nominations were last week, and Emily, KASSIE, and Julian Bleav NOISECAT, the co-directors of award season darling SUGARCANE, are here to talk about their powerful documentary, which comes from National Geographic Films. SUGARCANE chronicles an investigation into decades of abuse within the Canadian indigenous residential school system that ignited a reckoning in the lives of survivors and descendants. It focuses primarily on St. Joseph's School and the abuse which went on there and was covered up. Julian not only serves as the co-director, but is a participant in the film along with his father. This provides a remarkably personal and intimate angle to the project. You can watch SUGARCANE on Hulu, Nat Geo, or Disney+. SUGARCANE is the debut feature documentary from Julian Bleav NOISECAT and Emily KASSIE. This makes their award season run even more amazing. SUGARCANE has won somewhere between 23 and 35 awards, depending on what website you look at. This includes the National Board of Review Best Documentary. At this year's Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, SUGARCANE took home the Best Political Documentary and Best True Crime Documentary Awards. At the 2024 Sundance Film Festival, Emily and Julian won the Directing Award for U.S. documentaries. That's known as the Vanguard Award. At the 2024 San Francisco Film Festival, they took home the Best Documentary Award. A little more background on the film. In 2021, evidence of unmarked graves was discovered on the grounds of an indigenous residential school run by the Catholic Church in Canada. After years of silence, the forced separation, assimilation, and abuse many children experienced at these segregated boarding schools was brought to light, sparking a national outcry against a system designed to destroy indigenous communities. Set amidst a groundbreaking investigation which Emily and Julian capture beautifully and in detail. SUGARCANE illuminates the beauty of a community breaking cycles of intergenerational trauma and finding the strength to persevere. Here's a short trailer in case you haven't seen the film yet.
I felt dirty as an Indian all my life in residential school.
Look at that. It's all names.
I've been trying to find out what happened at St. Joseph's Mission.
For decades, there were reports of children disappearing from this facility.
How did it happen?
It's not something that you want to open up, it just keeps on damaging.
And we need to continue to hold each other up.
Our people are going to stand up.
You do know what happened with me, right?
I want to know the whole story.
Now, if you didn't see the Oscar nominations, SUGARCANE is up against Black Box Diaries, No Other Land, Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, and Porcelain War in the race for Best Documentary Feature. National Geographic Documentary Films recently announced that Oscar-nominated actress Lily Gladstone has been attached as an executive producer to SUGARCANE in hopes of boosting the film's chance at winning the Oscar. Raised on the Blackfeet Reservation, Gladstone was the first Native American to win the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama. Of course, that was for Killers of the Flower Moon. A little bit about Emily and Julian. Julian Bleav NOISECAT is a writer and journalist. He's currently working on his first book called We Survived the Night. You can see some of his journalism in the New York Times, Washington Post, and the New Yorker, just to name a few outlets. Emily KASSIE is an Emmy and Peabody nominated investigative journalist and filmmaker. Her work for the New York Times, PBS Frontline, Netflix, and others ranges from drug and weapons trafficking in the Saharan desert to immigrant detention in the United States. In 2021, she smuggled herself into Taliban territory in Afghanistan with PBS NewsHour correspondent Jane Ferguson to report on the imminent siege of Kabul and targeted killing of female leaders. Her work has been honored with multiple Edward R. Murrow World Press Photo and National Press Photographer Awards. All right, let's get to the interview. Enjoy. Emily, Julian, welcome to No Script, No Problem. Thanks for doing the show.
Thanks so much for having us, Steve.
You guys have won 35 odd awards, so many awards you probably have lost count. Sundance, you've done San Francisco Film Festival, you've been through all these festivals. Everybody is loving this movie. Could the two of you ever have imagined that people would respond this way to this film when it was just the two of you having these early discussions about should we start filming this investigation?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not. I think I'm still surprised that anyone has seen it and that it's moving people. I think it's still kind of a shock that people are getting it. You know, we lived this thing. We spent 2.5 years living in community. We shot 160 days, and this was our life, and just like a true labor of commitment and love to a story that hadn't been told and to truths that hadn't been uncovered. And I think it was, you know, our hope that it would make some change eventually, but could have never dreamed that it would arrive at this scale and that the record would be corrected.
And Julian, for you, like, I'm sure this was a big decision for you and your family to make, opening up a huge part of your story that's not easy to tell. Talk to me a little bit about the feeling at the beginning and how you're feeling now.
Yeah, you know, I was very concerned about the potential of the weight of this story to do real harm in the community and to my own family. That was the primary reason why I took so much time to consider whether I would even work on a documentary about this subject, let alone include my own family and my own story in it. I have been just so relieved and grateful that this has been, you know, overall an empowering and healing experience for the Williams Lake First Nation, for our participants, and for my own family. You know, you never really can fully predict how anything will go in the world. And, you know, I definitely chose to, it's probably a bad metaphor, but roll the dice, so to speak, emotionally and personally, with, you know, my own family story in particular, which is quite heavy and quite complicated and gets at some of the ways that this history of colonial brutality not only impacted our people, but then also became something that we sometimes perpetrated against ourselves. And I think that's a very hard part of the story that is very real and raw and difficult for us still to talk about. I'm just really grateful to my dad and to my family for supporting me and trusting me, and for, you know, audiences in Indian country for responding the way that they have.
Yeah, and for the audience, you and your dad have some incredibly emotional moments in the film. Emily, I'm assuming you were either filming those scenes or you're directing those scenes. Can the two of you kind of share for me what that was like, having to work together as a team? Julian, you're on camera. You're, you know, having these moments that could change the dynamic of your family.
I think that in order for us to get there, because my story and my family's story was essentially the last one that we really filmed, I think that Em and I needed to get into a real mind meld collaboratively as co-directors first. And I think that we had a real opportunity to do that when we were in the field shooting SUGARCANE. You know, over the first year before we really dived into my family's story, Em and I were in Williams Lake all the time, and we even traveled to the Vatican. And I think that we, over a number of conversations and experiences in the field, both beautiful and also sometimes challenging, we really came to a shared view of what the film was that we were making together. And I think that that was our sort of compass and North Star throughout this entire collaboration. And I think it also made it possible for me to, when we did end up choosing to include my family's story and my own story in the documentary, you know, to really trust that Em understood, you know, how I might want to approach that story as her co-director, and allowed me to be fully present in the life of my father and my family, you know, while we were living this incredibly weighty part of our history.
Yeah, you know, I think so much of this also comes from how the film came together. When I set out to follow a search at an Indian residential school, I had no idea that the school I would choose
would end up being the same school that Julian's family attended. That was a pure kind of coincidence, fate, whatever you want to call it. So out of 139 Indian residential schools in Canada, I happened to choose the one that Julian's family attended. And when I reached out to him, it was to collaborate as, creatives. And I had no idea that he was going to be in the film. And what I was really interested in particular was that Julian had been a reporter and storyteller covering indigenous life in North America, and with a very key and unique perspective that was so essential to telling the story from the inside, from getting under the skin of it. And so our collaboration required us to build an insane amount of trust with one another, not just with the community, that's one thing, but to also have his trust, not only to creatively be on the same page, but to take the very, delicate and sensitive matters of his actual family and trust me to carry that through in the most thoughtful and caring way that I could with the camera was, just a huge kind of leap of faith. And a leap of faith that required building blocks of friendship and of partnership in our creative work and creating that shared vision. And it was, it was some of my favorite shoot days were shooting Ed and Julian, just because we were on this kind of epic road trip. And we were kind of having a great time for a lot of it. And then in the moments where it was painful or hard, it was just, there was another kind of emotional level of filming Julian, knowing him so well and knowing what he had been carrying this whole way, and kind of made it this very interesting thing for me where I was feeling for him in the way I would for any of our other participants, but on a completely different level, because he had become like one of my closest friends at that point as well.
Stylistically, you made a very bold choice to not do traditional documentary interviews. When did the two of you make that choice? How did that decision get made? Was it in the field, or did you get to post? You had shot a bunch of interviews and got to post, realized you didn't need it.
Yeah, we only really shot actually one or two interviews in the very early going of our production. And we decided very early on that it was important for this to be a fully verite film, because, part of what we were setting out to show was the present consequences of the residential schools, and to do that in a way that got at the emotional and spiritual truth of this experience, which I think lent itself towards a real verite approach, where we, as Em said, lived in this community for the better part of 2.5 years. I moved in with my dad for 2 years while we made the thing, and I think that we felt very early on that the most important thing was for the audience to feel this film, rather than to come out of it with some sort of, bullet pointed list of important facts about Indian residential schools.
Yeah, I think, we wanted, as Julian was saying, the kind of emotional truth to be held at the same kind of priority as the journalistic truth of the film. I think for me, I come from a visual journalism background where I'm making docs that often have verite, but have this kind of requirement of this informational and exposition piece of it. And so it was kind of this really freeing and terrifying thing to dive in as a cinematographer to a verite film, knowing that we were going to have to shoot an insane amount of footage and then somehow figure out in the edit how to get across all of the important contextual things for you to understand the system and et cetera. And, we kind of leaned on a couple text cards at the beginning to do that, but that was a massive, massive challenge. And in the field, we're okay, we're committing to just following this. And that was kind of easy enough because we could just be present in the lives of our characters as things were unfolding and really note and be very keenly aware of the moments that were going to help us tell it when we got to the edit. But then once we got to an edit, it was so much of how do we convey enough information, but not too much information? How much of the scene has to nod to some piece of it? How do we drip? And just massive kudos to our incredible editors, Nathan Panwar and Maya Daisy Hawk. We had an incredible experience working with, weaving together 160 days of footage into an hour 47.
Okay, that's a lot. Let's talk about financing and how you guys got this made, because that's, Julian, you're moving in. Emily, that's a lot of footage that you're dumping on 2 editors. When did you guys start to get money? Did you get grants? When did Nat Geo come on board? Talk to me a little bit about how you ended up getting this thing made.
Yeah, so at the beginning, we used my savings and some of Jules too. For the first maybe 6 to 9 months, we were just running on that. Jules and I didn't pay ourselves. I already have my camera gear, so we were just paying Crystal Marca, our DP who I was shooting with, and for travel and things like that, kind of self-funding. And then we got really lucky that we got 2 grants, the Catapult grant and the Sundance Film Fund, Documentary Film Fund grant, which gave us a little bit to keep going. And then the smartest decision we made was at that point bringing on my producing partner, Kellen Quinn, who understood and knew how to independently finance a documentary. I had done a ton of field producing, but in newsrooms. And so raising a budget wasn't something I had to do. We went through the Catalyst Lab at Sundance, which was an incredible program where they, kind of help you figure out how to pitch your film and then bring in funders to listen to you pitch the film. And that was the way that we brought in most of our grant makers and investors, and particularly Fit Via V and Impact Partners came in early and strong, and they've been incredible partners. But it was a long road and a lot of cobbling together of bits and pieces.
What I'd say that I think is potentially of note is that, Em and I are both Canadian nationals. I have dual citizenship. So, we kind of early on also had to make a decision about which sort of funding ecosystem we were going to move through. And we ended up, as Em sort of said without saying, moving through a largely US-based independent doc funding ecosystem, and only got a very small fraction of our funding from Canada, from the Canada Council for the Arts, which I think is interesting. I think that in this moment in time in particular, where there's so much attack on the arts and media, particularly on the, private independent philanthropic sources that are the sources of funding for this art form and many others, as well as for a great deal of journalism and activism and politics at this point. I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens to that landscape at the same time as, political wins in Canada might mean that there is going to be significantly decreased funding or some decrease in funding for the same sources, but that come from in Canada, the public purse rather than private sources.
And then just to add on distribution, after we premiered at Sundance, we didn't come into the festival with any distribution. Nat Geo the next day shared with us that the film made a massive impact for them and that they wanted to come on board, which was a total dream come true for us. We didn't know that anyone would buy the film. So they came on board very quickly after that. And they've been an incredible distribution partner. This is not an easy story to take on. It was gutsy, I think, to do so. And we're very grateful to them.
Films like yours are so important. These stories that you're telling are so important. How important is it for platforms to keep investing in projects like yours?
I mean, I think we obviously think it's incredibly essential. I mean, where would we be without them? But, I think that it goes both ways. I think that it's often remarked, and there was a New York Times article to this effect, that the distributors, the platforms are, have very little courage right now about serious and politically oriented documentaries. And I think that there's a large amount of truth to that. I think, for example, No Other Land, I think, could find a very large audience in the United States right now and is not, because the distributors don't have the courage to give it that platform. On the other hand, I think that it's also important to encourage the distributors when they do make that rare good decision, like, distributing our film, SUGARCANE, or Black Box Diaries, or Daughters, or any other number of, serious, hard-hitting documentaries, that they get some sort of reward for doing that. Because I think at the same time as I think it's important to criticize them for not having the courage, I think that it's also entirely possible that we could see a world where they take no risks, where the few risks that we have seen them take, they are not taking in a year, 2, 3 years down the line. While that sounds like a very meager reality, I think that we still do need these distributors to actually take a few risks. A few risks is definitely better than no risks at all.
It is a politically rife time everywhere, particularly in the US. And I think that this is a time where journalists and storytellers and filmmakers play an essential role. And I think if we don't support them in doing that and give them a platform, then we lose a critical voice for democracy and for human rights in this country and elsewhere. And so I think I can't think of anything more important for these streamers to do than take on films that matter and that will make a difference in people's lives, because the other avenues for that are really thinning, and the funding in journalism is drying up and so many other art forms. And so, we hope that other streamers step up in the way that National Geographic did for this film and for us.
The choice of B-roll, the choice of scenics that you guys made sure to include, created a very, very distinct dichotomy. It's a very tough story about abuse in these boarding schools, but I really admired the way you took us away for moments with these incredible scenics, these incredible beauties. Can you talk about were those really distinct decisions, what you decided to use?
Yeah, so we, one thing is that we actually waited to shoot a lot of our landscapes till the end because we wanted to know what we wanted to say about them. And there were some ideas that came very early. One thing that Julian would talk about a lot is this being in a post-apocalyptic world for Indigenous people, that this is a post-apocalyptic landscape. We were living in Williams Lake, which is a 2-mill town where logging is king. There were all these kind of nuances to the world that without living there or knowing it or your family being there, you might not know. And so that was really important for us to really take in. But we knew that we wanted to show like the epicness of the landscapes and what was taken, but also what goes on, and this kind of feeling of time immemorial and how, the river as this kind of thoroughfare of life and sustenance, and the kind of big skies and the way that those kind of open up as well. And so we shot a lot at the end. And then when we were into the edit, it was actually in the last 2 weeks of the edit that we made choices. And what that looked like was Chris LaMarca and I literally went through every single scenic and made a selects of like our best stuff, like the best of the best of the best. And then Jules and Chris and myself and Kellen and the team like worked through those kind of interstitial moments of like, what do we want to say and what are the shots to say them? And so there's like, there's this moment where you see a deer in front of a milling apparatus, and then you see like a man wandering through an alleyway near a kind of defunct motel with a cowboy hat. And it's like these images that we really thought through in the end of like, what is exactly what we want to say with the visual here. But we had accumulated like such a rich bank of them that it made it a really like fun experience to get to make those choices.
Yeah, I think that, we really benefited, first of all, from incredible cinematography. I mean, Em and Chris just won a cinematography award from Cinema Eye. And I also give a shout out to our drone guy, Nick Ramey, who has a couple really gorgeous shots in there that actually are really crucial, I'd say, to the visual storytelling of the film. We also had the pleasure of working with Justin Zweifbach, who became a good friend and was just like also incredibly talented. And I think that one thing that we were very thoughtful about, because we spent so much time in Williams Lake, in particular at SUGARCANE, but also just in the broader region of the Caribou and broader interior British Columbia, was how we wanted to tell a visual story about this place. For example, we thought a lot about the fact that, the res sugarcane is on one side of the lake, Williams Lake, from the town that is Williams Lake, and that they look across each other, this predominantly white Canadian Western cowboy mill mining town across from, this res that's just up a dirt road from the Mission and is literally on a road called Mission Road. We thought about how we wanted to tell the story about that central place to this film. And we also thought a little bit about, the other places that it was important to see. Of course, the Fraser River, which is the main artery of the entire province of British Columbia, really, but of more importantly for this film, the Secwepemc and all Salish peoples. You see me and my dad get in Canam Lake, which is really important because we're from Canam Lake. And, you even see us drive the Duffy Lake Road, which is actually quite treacherous road, I should say. It's not open all the time. And those shots that you see of the mountains up from the car, those are the mountains on the Duffy Lake Road, which has its own whole cultural significance and backstory. And so all of these things and many others, were things that we were talking about and thinking through. And then, we had the incredible fortune and artistic wealth of just beautiful images to pull from.
One other thing that I'll add is we were really, inspired by the archival as well. The archival in the film, for example, there's a whole kind of series of scenes during Christmas and winter. And there were also images from St. Joseph's Mission of kids sledding and doing all of these like different activities. And so we thought a lot about how to echo that in the footage. So there actually is a sledding moment. There's like one shot of a little kid pulling another kid on the sled. Julian and I got the first snowstorm of winter. It started snowing and we just like raced to the Mission. And then we happened to arrive at the Sugarcane Church as that crow was sitting just on top of the cross.
So many crows and cows and horses.
Colonial cow. Like we had this idea of like what the cow represented and like not being like a native of the space and kind of like stopping Julian's way.
And they're black.
They're black and they also kind of represent
like the
priests and the nuns. Yeah, exactly. And so there was so much, and the crow was also like a foreshadowing of kind of symbol of
what was to come. And so there were so many kind of Easter eggs that we thought about intellectually and philosophically and of the place, but then brought to life in the visual. And that creatively for the two of us was just so enriching.
I love that. You guys really thought about every single detail. You guys really attention to detail.
It's almost, I would describe it almost like a dense minimalism is kind of what was ultimately what we were going for. We wanted a density of thought and intention and things that we were gesturing at, but a minimalism of, lines and dialogue and things to convey it. Another thing that I thought a lot about was, coverage of this world and what we were trying to say about it. I think that included what elements of the culture of this place were we incorporating into the film. And I think that we did a really good job of incorporating a lot of the very significant parts of the unique culture of the Secwepemc people and the Caribou region. You see rodeos, you see a moment where a kid's playing hockey, you see a powwow. We almost got a scene with Lahal, the traditional gambling game, into it with me and my dad, but it didn't quite make the cut. You see fishing for salmon on the Fraser River, which is something our people have done for literally thousands of years. And that was something really important to me because, this is a document also of a people in a particular time. All of us, will someday not be here. And I think it's really important for us to understand and see, our parents and our grandparents in the world that they moved through and lived in, because as Indigenous peoples, that's exactly what we're supposed to be passing on and carrying forward. That's what they tried to kill, after all. And the last thing was, how did I want to live my life with my dad and tell that story? Like even the choice of the places that we went and the route that the road trip took. I happened to pick him up in Whistler, which is in our my grandfather, his father's traditional territory. We went and visited his aunt, Martina, on his dad's side, in Mount Currie, which was very purposeful. You actually see Mount Currie behind her house. Tzazil is what it's called in our language. We went and visited a couple of sacred sites that actually didn't make it into the film on that road trip, and journeyed up the Fraser River. We stopped at Hungry Herbie's, which is like an iconic, fast food stop in Cache Creek, British Columbia. Everybody who drives through the region knows it. Just like sort of things of that nature, just being very thoughtful about how we told this story and how we chose to live our lives through it.
The story really talks about some horrific things that take place at these indigenous boarding schools, right? Abuse, and we're talking about the Catholic Church here. In America, they've done horrific things. Did you guys get any pushback from the Catholic Church? We all know how powerful they are.
I would say that the Catholic Church is a very big institution, and it has many different arms and organs and people that are its constituencies. Clearly, there are some who carry some guilt about this history. Otherwise, the Pope would never have apologized for it. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Because that is the dominant stance of the Catholic Church. I have some definite, and I think we do have some definite issues with the way that apology was worded and with their broader actions. But, they at least are oriented in the direction of, atonement in some way, shape, or form. I would say that there is also, just as there is in any institution and every community, an edge of more sort of right-leaning, and in this instance, sort of denialist conversation on the internet, primarily of people who are clearly Catholics, but who have a very hard time believing that their church perpetrated these harms. And, I think that there's, in one way, there's like a reason to, look at that and ask about it. And there's some weird stuff going on. And another way, I think it's like a lot of other, denialist type stuff where it doesn't really deserve much oxygen because it's, it's engaged in untruth. It's not interested in accuracy.
In terms of our access, it was kind of interesting because on the one hand, we were kind of blocked on that Vatican trip from getting access to pretty much everything, and really had to kind of push our way in to be able to film Rick on that journey, particularly with the Pope inside the Vatican as well, which is another story. But we did get access to filming the priest who Rick confronts, who's the head of the Oblates. And it was kind of remarkable that they were going to let us film this conversation. I mean, I think that they didn't know exactly what Rick would say, but they also opened their doors to us to film it. And that's not nothing. And at the same time, we haven't heard anything from the church on the film as a response. And, this is an institution that hasn't opened its records to indigenous communities so that they can at least know the truth of what happened. And though the Pope apologized for the actions of individuals, we know that this was an institutionally sanctioned system, and that priests were moved from school to school after they were found to have abused dozens of children. So, there's still a lot to answer for.
One of the most powerful moments in the film for me was the phone call with the priest. It was chilling. Can you guys tell me about that scene?
Yeah, so I had the kind of honor of working alongside Charlene and Whitney on the investigation. And one of the goals was to see if anybody was still alive, trying to hunt down former teachers or priests. And Glenn Dowdy, the priest who was on the phone, was one of the only remaining people alive. And Charlene knew him when she was there. She knew he had been prosecuted and convicted. Actually, so we knew for sure he had committed the crimes, not just from, the hundreds of survivor stories against him, but also in a court of law. I tracked him down and found his phone number. It took calling about 100 phone numbers to find the one that was his. And so one day he picked up and I said, is this Glenn Downey? And he said it is. And then I think I was like, okay, thanks so much. like left the call. And my role was just to help gather the information. And so Charlene then had the phone number. So I knew in that moment that she was going to reach him. I had no idea what she would say. I had no idea what he would say. And so it was kind of this very tense build to, this is the only priest who's alive and could potentially give access. And I think Charlene, had led these incredible investigations that she had been a part of, and even led like a healing circle where she brought one of the priests back to the community to do a kind of sort of justice where the abused, the victims were able to speak to this priest and what he had, the harm he had caused. But I think even she was nervous in that moment because we knew that this was kind of like a shot in the dark. And watching her in that moment, it was kind of very painful because he gave these kind of vague and almost creepy answers of like, he seemed to like know that something had happened, but seemed to like disassociate. He's also very elderly and wasn't like, kind of pushing her away. And then he hung up on her. And it was just like a very difficult moment because one of the things about these investigations is that so many of the perpetrators are dead. And so access to information is really limited, and finding documents even is like a needle in a haystack. So it was disappointing. And at the same time, you see her kind of determination in that moment.
The point of the film, right, is not just to document the atrocities of this school. The film is not called St. Joseph's Mission and its survivors. It's called SUGARCANE, right? And SUGARCANE is the name of this community. And so I think that if we had just created a story that was a document of, pain, I think that we actually would have missed the story, which is not a story of a people who were as intended by this, system. The Indian problem, quote unquote, did not go away. We're still around, and I guess to certain people we're still a problem. And I think that part of it is of how we survived and how our culture persists and how we still live a very communal way of life, a way that actually is quite reminiscent of the way that our ancestors have lived for a very long time, is the dominant part of the story. And so I think that throughout the film and throughout the making of the film as well, there were so many parts of this that were about community, about family, about people coming together and having a great time, including, our film team.
As Julian was saying, like this is a story about people who, despite every kind of horrific attempt to eliminate them, survived and have like fought and loved their way back to one another and are rebuilding and reclaiming. And it's like an incredibly beautiful world with hilarious and smart and interesting people, as you see in the film. And so we had a hell of a time making it. And, like in between, Rick having those intense moments, we also spent many, many nights together watching American Idol, which was his favorite show. Jules and myself and Chris, we were a family out there and we lived together. And so, we had a lot of traditions. We spent a lot of nights at the Dairy Queen, which actually has no dairy in it. But, little kind of ways to celebrate. We got to go out on the land with Chief Willie Sellers and his kids and his family, on the river, out on hunts. Like, we were having the time of our lives. Honestly, it was the best 3 years of my life. And I treasure it. And yes, there were like very painful moments, but what you don't see is that like, this was like, just like a family and so much love and so much joy. And I think that hopefully comes through in the film as well.
And now the nominees for Best Documentary Feature Film.
Okay.
Black Box Diaries, No Other Land, Porcelain War, Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, and SUGARCANE.
All right. So how are we feeling? What's our gut instinct? There's some pretty good films, but how are we feeling?
I I think it's an incredible year of films. We feel, Julian was saying this, I think at the beginning, but like we feel so lucky to be on this slate. Like films like Black Box Diaries and Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, No Other Land. This is like a tapestry of the world in a very difficult moment. And I think we're just grateful that SUGARCANE has come as far as it has, and that it's made the impact it has, that it's been shown to indigenous communities across North America, that it made it to the White House, to Canadian Parliament. You know, like it's been an incredible ride, and I think, you know, the story and the survivors deserve the platform. But either way, I think we're just in a space of like really deep gratitude for how much love the film has gotten, and you know, we hope for the best, but it's been an amazing ride either way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just incredibly grateful to get to make a movie like this and to get to make art and to make some semblance of a living doing it. I mean, that's in and of itself is the real win. And to get to do it again is the real win. You know, obviously it would be a huge, you know, testament to the power of the film we made. And I think, you know, more importantly for me, to the people who opened up their lives to us, you know, my family and the Williams Lake First Nation and so many other people. If we got that kind of recognition, because that would ultimately just mean that more people would get to go out and see the film, you know. And I think that was part of our end of the bargain as filmmakers, with Chief Willie and Charlene especially, and everybody, was to make sure that the story was known and told. And we are really proud of what we made.
All right, Julian, Emily, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks,
great.
Steve. And congratulations to your Buckeyes, man.
Hey, we get lucky once every like 5 to 10 years. So I am very thankful. Yes. How could I forget? As a native Ohioan and lifelong Buckeyes fan, it was wonderful to see Ohio State beat Notre Dame to win the college football national championship. I mean, after they lost to Michigan at the end of the regular season, I had written off any chance that Ohio State would win it all. So this one was especially sweet. Okay, moving on. Like last week, in the show notes, please take a look. Check out those GoFundMe links. I included those because I know a bunch of folks who lost their homes in the wildfires here in Los Angeles. So if you have a few bucks that you're able to donate to those people, I now know 9 people who lost their homes in the wildfires. And if you can help out, it would be really appreciated. The good news is that the Palisades fire is 95% contained at this point. The Eden fire is 99% contained, and the Hughes fire is 98% contained. Right now, if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, you can see the footage that my friend Wyatt Campbell shot in Malibu. He shot some footage from his car, and you can see the insane flames. And it's just terrifying what he was seeing in his car, what his mother was seeing from her home, and just everybody in that area, what they were dealing with. So I appreciate Wyatt sharing this footage with me and allowing me to put this on the show. Over in Altadena, which again is not even part of Los Angeles, the city, it's part of Los Angeles County. Over in Altadena, dealing with the Eaton fire, my good friend Dustin Rubin lost his home. And you've probably heard Dustin's voice somewhere on a commercial or a TV show, as he's a great voiceover artist. One of the local news stations did a little piece on Dustin and how he and his wife are dealing with losing their home. Here it is.
I feel like my family, we're kind of in a limbo right now. We don't know where we want to be.
Dustin Rubin is a man without a home. For 7 years, he and his wife lived in this house on Las Flores Drive in Altadena. Then on January 7th, the winds came.
We had a patio set, a very heavy metal patio set, that lifted into the air and propelled just past me into our fence.
They prepared to evacuate, as they've done during past wind events.
The power went out at that point, and we just said, okay, we're going to get out of here.
Flames in nearby Eaton Canyon were spreading in their neighborhood's direction.
By the time we got out of our neighborhood, pulled over, could see the fire, and it was like, ooh, this looks bad. Your brain is not like, this wasn't a new drill, really. Even when fires, come, it's like, it's winds and it's smoke. But it's not total decimation.
Unfortunately, this time would be different.
A fireball combined with 90-mile-per-hour winds, there's no stopping that. That next morning, on January 8th, one of my neighbors called and said he spoke to another neighbor. There was visual confirmation that our entire block was just chimneys. It was devastating. I mean, it's the worst kind of surreal. It's just like our neighborhood looks like it was bombed. We're looking at what a day prior had been our dream house. It was our first home, and it was just rubble. In fact, the only thing that was still left was the top of a rake and a mug with a heart on it, which somehow seemed extra symbolic because my wife had left with only one shirt with a heart on it that said, "You're doing great."
Dustin's loss encompasses far more than just his house.
Our community is gone. Our favorite, restaurants are not there. Our post office is not there. It's all gone, and that's incredibly hard to process.
Not long ago, his home insurer dropped his policy, but he managed to get a new one just a month before the fire. So rebuilding is an option, one of many decisions that lie ahead.
The emotional spectrum is insane. We start to think about rebuilding there. It's so difficult to fathom. I don't even know what that would look like. We don't know, will LA be the same?
For the past 2 weeks, this voice actor has been showered with generosity and support.
Yeah, I'm happy to be safe. We all got out. This could be much, much worse, and really grateful.
He's now renting a place in Santa Monica as he gradually gets back up on his feet.
I feel like I'm outside of myself watching this happen in like a made-for-TV movie, and then having a moment of being like, oh no, this is real.
Very real. And Rick Sabrandi, CGTN, Santa Monica, California.
Meanwhile, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, one of my best friends from college lives in New Orleans, and they got 10 inches of snow last week. If you're watching on my YouTube channel, you can see the footage that he sent me right now. He actually got snowed into his office and ended up spending the night at work because his car stalled. The record-breaking winter storm impacted 1,500 miles of the Deep South from the Texas Gulf Coast to the Atlantic coast of the Carolinas, causing widespread closures and travel disruptions, including stranded motorists and thousands of canceled flights. The storm, along with the brutal cold that helped cause it, is blamed for at least 11 deaths. All right, let's switch things up. Just a little bit of entertainment news. Netflix had a monster fourth quarter in 2024.
Netflix beating on the top and bottom line, revenues of $10.25 billion ahead of estimates of $10.11 billion. Earnings per share of $4.27, beating estimates of $4.20. So that's about double the year ago period. Now, net adds here are the big surprise here that's really driving the stock up more than 10%. The company reporting 18.9 million net new subscriber additions. The estimate was for 8.9 million. So that means that Netflix added 10 million more subscribers than anticipated. And what's key here is this is the last quarter that the company is going to be announcing subscriber numbers.
So now you have roughly 301.6 million global subscribers for Netflix, and investors are valuing Netflix at over $400 billion. That's more than Disney, Comcast, Warner Brothers Discovery, and Fox combined. I think it's overvalued, but hey, what do I know? US viewers spent more time watching original series on Netflix than every other streaming platform combined. Netflix had 7 of the 10 most popular series, led by Fool Me Once and Bridgerton. That being said, Netflix continues to also deliver plenty of crap. For example, I watched 10 minutes of their new reality show From Wags to Riches. I thought I was watching old VH1 celeb reality from 2008. So with lowbrow reality TV like that, live sports like the NFL on Christmas Day, comedy specials like the Tom Brady Roast, original dramas, of course, like Stranger Things and Wednesday, and a massive library of popular shows and movies, Netflix is basically cable TV. You're not flipping through channels, you're flipping through Netflix. Because it's so ubiquitous, it's no surprise they are raising prices again. Their ad-supported tier is increasing from $6.99 to $7.99 a month, while the standard ad-free tier will go from $15.49 to $17.99 per month. Its highest priced premium tier is also increasing from $22.99 to $24.99 per month. That means the standard monthly price of ad-free Netflix jumped from $7.99 to $17.99 over the course of the last 13 years. All right, last up. If it feels like you aren't seeing as many new shows on TV, your eyes are not deceiving you. The number of new TV shows in the United States fell by 7% last year and 17% the year before that. While many of the world's largest media companies said they were cutting programming budgets, the new data from Luminate shows just how much. Warner Brothers Discovery has cut its output almost in half over the last 5 years, while Netflix, the biggest producer among streaming services, has cut back by double digits. The number of comedy series has declined by 39% over the last 5 years. Now that's a shame. We got 4 more years of Trump. I need my sitcoms back. We need more comedy, not less. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of No Script, No Problem. Please remember, take a look at the show notes if you have the ability to donate to any of the GoFundMes to help these folks who've been affected by the fires. Please go for it. Be generous. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, download, and rate it with 5 stars. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Stitcher, and TuneIn. You can also find it at Bleav.com and at Bleav Podcast. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, LinkedIn, Mastodon, Snapchat, Threads, or Facebook. You can also send me any questions that you have to noscriptnoproblempodcast@gmail.com. If you are interested in advertising on the show, please contact Bleav at Bleav.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Steve Berkowitz for No Script, No Problem.